The wagon wheels creaked against the frozen ground as Margaret clutched the letter in her trembling hands. For children huddled behind her skirts, their faces pressed against the rough fabric of her worn dress. The eldest, Sarah, was barely 10 years old, her eyes already carrying the weight of too many responsibilities. The twins, Michael and Matthew, stood silent at 8 years old, while little Emma, just 5, clung to her mother's leg with tiny fingers that had known more hunger than comfort. Margaret had written the letter 3 months ago, her hand shaking as she dipped the pen into ink that cost her 2 days of washing other people's laundry. She had been honest, brutally so, because she could not afford to travel all the way to Colorado Territory only to be turned away. The words had been difficult to write, each one feeling like a confession of failure. I am a widow of 28 years. My husband died in a mining accident 2 years past. I have 4 children. I can read and write. I can cook, sew, garden, and work hard. I understand if this is too much burden for any man to accept. She had not expected a response. What man seeking a wife through a newspaper advertisement would want a woman who came with 4 additional mouths to feed? But 6 weeks later, a letter arrived with a Colorado postmark. Inside, in surprisingly neat handwriting, were words she had read so many times the paper had begun to wear soft at the creases. Mrs. Margaret Brennan, I am James Crawford, 34 years of age, owner of a modest ranch in the territory. I lost my own wife and son to fever 3 years ago. I am not looking for perfection. I am looking for partnership. If you are willing to come west, I will meet you at the station in Denver. Bring your children. There is room for all. Now, standing on the platform with her 4 children and 2 battered trunks containing everything they owned in the world, Margaret wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The train journey had taken every penny she had saved, plus some she had borrowed from her sister with a promise to repay that she had no idea how to keep. If this James Crawford took one look at her ragged family and changed his mind, they would be stranded 1,000 miles from anything familiar, with no money and nowhere to go. Mama, I'm cold, Emma whimpered, and Margaret pulled the child closer, wrapping her thin shawl around both of them. Soon, darling. Soon we'll be somewhere warm. She scanned the crowd of faces, looking for a man who matched the single tintype photograph James had sent. It showed a tall man with dark hair and a serious expression, standing beside a horse. But photographs could lie, and 3 years could change a person considerably. Mrs. Brennan? Margaret turned to find a man standing a few feet away, hat in his hands. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders and weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and his eyes, a startling blue, studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Mr. Crawford, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, then his gaze moved to the children clustered around her. Margaret felt her stomach clench. This was the moment. This was when he would make an excuse, when he would explain that he had reconsidered, that it was all too much. Instead, he crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Sarah. You must be the eldest, he said gently. Your mother wrote that you helped take care of your brothers and sister. Sarah nodded, suspicious and protective, moving slightly in front of the younger children. James smiled, a small expression that softened his stern features. That makes you pretty important. I'm hoping you might help me learn what everyone likes to eat, and what makes them feel safe. I'm a bit out of practice with children. He stood and turned to Margaret. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she forced herself to meet his gaze despite wanting to stare at the ground. She knew what he saw, a thin woman in a dress that had been mended too many times, with 4 children who looked as worn and worried as she felt. The letter said 4 children, he finally said, and Margaret's heart sank. But it didn't mention how brave they must be, to travel so far to a new life. Or how brave their mother is. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She had not cried when Thomas died, crushed in the mine collapse. She had not cried when the landlord gave her notice. She would not cry now. Mr. Crawford, I want to be clear about our situation, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Ievalmos domani. The children need new clothes and shoes. Emma still has nightmares about her father. The boys get into fights. Sarah acts older than she is because she's had to. I can work hard, but I cannot promise that any of this will be easy. James put his hat back on and picked up both of her trunks as if they weighed nothing. Mrs. Brennan, I did not advertise for a wife because I wanted easy. I have a ranch that needs a woman's touch and a home that's been empty too long. I have respect for honest work and honest people. What I see here is a woman who's kept her family together through hard times, and children who've learned to be strong. That's more than most can say. He started walking toward a large wagon, then stopped and looked back. You're coming with me, he said simply. Not a question, but a statement of fact, as if there had never been any doubt. Margaret stood frozen for a moment, unable to quite believe what was happening. Sarah tugged at her sleeve. Mama, is it all right? She looked down at her daughter's face, saw the hope struggling against fear, and made her decision. Yes, she said. Yes, it's all right. The ride to the ranch took 3 hours, and James filled the silence with practical information. The house had 3 bedrooms. He had already prepared one for Margaret and one for the children. There were chickens and a cow. A garden plot waited for spring planting. The nearest neighbors were 2 miles away, a family named Morrison with children around the same ages. The children dozed against each other in the back of the wagon, exhausted from travel and emotion. Margaret sat stiffly on the bench beside James, hyper-aware of his presence, of the competent way he handled the horses, of the occasional glances he cast her way. You're wondering if you made a mistake, he said suddenly. Margaret started. It's all right. I wondered the same thing when I sent that letter. Wondered if I was being a fool, offering to take on a ready-made family when I could barely handle my own grief. He was quiet for a moment. My son was 6 when he died. Daniel. He liked to follow me around the ranch, pretending to help. After he and my wife passed, the silence in that house nearly killed me. I'm sorry, Margaret sighed softly. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand that I know what it means to lose someone. I know what it means to keep going when every part of you wants to stop. When I read your letter, I saw someone who understood that too. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was modest but well kept. The house was larger than Margaret had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they pulled up, the door opened to reveal an older woman with gray hair and a kind face. This is Mrs. Henderson, James explained as he helped Margaret down from the wagon. She's the Morrisons' grandmother and was kind enough to come over and prepare a meal for us. Mrs. Henderson bustled forward, taking in the tired children with experienced eyes. Come in, all of you. There's stew on the stove and fresh bread. We'll get everyone fed and warmed up. The house was warm and smelled of cooking food. Margaret felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. The main room had a large fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in the afternoon light. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen with a proper stove. It was not fancy, but it was clean and cared for, and after years of cramped, cold rooms in the city, it seemed almost luxurious. Mrs. Henderson herded the children to a table and began serving them stew. Emma climbed into a chair and stared at the bowl in front of her as if it might disappear. Margaret started forward to help, but James touched her arm gently. Mrs. Henderson has it managed. Come, let me show you the rest of the house. He led her through the rooms, pointing out where things were, explaining what worked and what needed fixing. The bedroom he had prepared for her had a real bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, and a window overlooking the yard. The children's room had 2 beds and space for more if needed. I can build another bed, James said. Or add another room if necessary. The house can grow. Margaret turned to face him. They were alone for the first time since meeting, and she knew there were things that needed to be said. Mr. Crawford, why did you say yes? Really? There must have been other women, women without children, women who would have been less complicated. He leaned against the doorframe, considering his answer. There were 3 other letters, he admitted. All from women younger than you, without encumbrances. But none of them were honest. They wrote about being excellent cooks and beautiful and accomplished. They wrote about what they could do for me. He paused. Your letter was the only one that was real. You didn't promise me anything except hard work and honesty. You didn't hide your children or pretend they didn't exist. You treated this like what it is, a partnership between two people who need each other. And if I cannot be what you need? Margaret asked quietly. Then we'll figure it out together. Mrs. Brennan, Margaret, if I may, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not expecting immediate affection or even happiness. I'm expecting that we'll both try. That we'll be kind to each other and to the children. That we'll build something stable and good, even if it takes time. From the other room came the sound of Emma's laughter, a sound Margaret had not heard in months. Through the doorway, she could see her daughter smiling at something Mrs. Henderson had said, the fear finally gone from her small face. All right, Margaret said. We'll try. The word "we" felt strange on her tongue, foreign after 2 years of shouldering everything alone. But as James smiled and led her back to join the others, Margaret allowed herself to feel something she had not permitted in a very long time. Not happiness, not yet, but the fragile beginning of hope.